the Institution of Engineers India to kindly deliver the welcome address.
Well, thank you, Anirban. Good afternoon and welcome all the dignitaries on this today's webinar. First, I'd like to convey my happy Dussehra greetings to you and after this festival season. So, Dr. Hemant Thackeray, President of Institution of Engineers, Dr. N.T. Ranga Reddy, Chairman, Mechanical Engineering Division Board, Engineer Sandeep Dev, Vice President, Dr. G. Ranganatha, Chairman of CATE, IEI, Honorary Secretary Dr. Raju Bosha, Mr. Anirban Datta, Joint Honorary Secretary, and the moderator of today's webinar. And today's eminent panel speaker, Mr. Soubhik Bhattacharya, Associate Director, Integrated Policy Analysis Division, the Energy and Resource Institute, TERI, Mr. Bhaskar Datta, Business Consultant and Convener, Mechanical Engineering Division, all council members, corporate members, ladies and gentlemen. Today, on this occasion of this webinar, the topic is sustainability opportunities and challenges for electric vehicles towards energy transition in India, organized by the Mechanical Engineering Division of West Bengal State Center. Let me extend a warm welcome to you all and our panel speakers. Now, the topic is sustainability opportunity and challenges for electric vehicles towards energy transition in India. Today, we are talking about achieving a global climate goal to reach the net zero emission by 2050. Net zero refers to the year by which greenhouse gas emission produced will be the balance by those that are absorbed. At COP26, India announced that it would be net zero by 2070. Was preceding this target, termination from emissions from fossil fuels based automotive sector would be very crucial, though curbing of internal combustion engine powered vehicles through more electric vehicles to stay in the market. India is trying to become a global electric vehicle hub. However, these increases still amounts to less than 1% of the target. While the industry remains nascent, the sector has to overcome several obstacles to dominate the economy. It is expected to grow faster during the forecast period due to various government initiatives and policies. The government too has rolled out several initiatives to both the consumer and manufacturer to stimulate the electric vehicle market. India offers the world's largest untapped market, especially in the electric two-wheeler segment. Transition to e-mobility in India would be playing a very significant role in energy transmission policy and would be influenced by more challenges in near future. But those need to overcome through a pragmatic and sustainable roadmap to progress towards net zero. Today, we have our panel speakers who are distinguished personalities in this field and are the distinguished pillars. Let us join together and explore much on this topic. I hope you will enjoy today's deliberation in a graceful manner. Thanks and welcome you once again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Das, for your nice welcome address. Now I request our beloved chairman of the Mechanical Engineering Division Board of the Institution of Engineers, Dr. N.T. Ranga Reddy, who has joined us to encourage from Bengaluru, and I would request Dr. N.T. Ranga Reddy to share his thoughts with us.
Thank you, Mr. Anirban Dattaji. Namaskar to all. The respected chairman of West Bengal State Center, Dr. Nirmal Das, and our today chief panelist, Mr. Soubhik Bhattacharya ji, Associate Director, Integrated Policy Analysis Division, the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI, and our engineer Bhaskar Datta, business consultant and convener, Mechanical Engineering Division Board, West Bengal State Center. And our most energetic moderator, Mr. Anirban Datta, Chief Technology Officer, Messiah Engineers, and Honorary Secretary, West Bengal State Center, and all the corporate members who are attending this program, and all other future builders of this great country. And very good afternoon to all of you. Since inception in 1920, the Institution of Engineers India has upheld the mandate of promoting and augmenting the science, practice and business of engineering through different technical activities and providing insights to the policymakers regarding the matters related to engineering profession, imparting engineering education for working community in non-formal mode, fostering national and international cooperation in engineering and technology, dissemination and sharing of engineering and technical knowledge through activities on contemporary topics, and encouraging, elevating and recognizing the technical knowledge and practice of individuals and organizations through scholarships and awards. Standing at the crossroads of a century of glorious existence, a little marred by the global pandemic, it was felt appropriate to bethink, introspect, and disseminate ideas, concepts, and best practices in the emerging areas of technology and engineering through virtual platforms, which finally have evolved into IEA Technical Webinar Series. Today, we are all excited at the prospect of listening and gaining insights from our distinguished theme speaker, Mr. Souvik Bhattacharya ji, on sustainable opportunities and challenges for electric vehicle towards energy transition in India. Electric vehicles are one of the most promising technologies for reducing emissions in global transportation, whereas the benefits derived depend upon the provenance of the power they run on. The expected growth of electric vehicles offers great opportunities for the implementation of a novel approach in planning, managing, and controlling the power system, especially in the presence of a relevant and diffuse renewable energy generation. In this context, the fleets of electric vehicles, and in particular the charging stations, can assume an important role in energy management. In fact, the availability of energy and communication interconnection between the vehicles and the power system allows the proper energy control of electric vehicle fleets. Considering them as a cluster of agents able to act on the power system as a controllable load and generator, electric transportation also offers deal opportunities for the broader introduction of renewables to the transport sector. As energy consuming technologies, electric vehicles create a new demand for electricity that can be supplied by renewables. In addition to the benefits of this shift, such as reducing CO2 emissions and air pollution, electric mobility also creates significant efficiency gains and could emerge as an important source of storage for variable sources of renewable electricity. Electric vehicles provide the opportunities to link the renewable power and low carbon transport sectors. It represents the great opportunity in the decarbonization scenario that has double impact, increase the use of renewable energy in mobility sector, and support the massive diffusion of renewable energy sources to a distribution network. To this end, we are very much eager to listen from the theme speaker of the day about the sustainable opportunities and challenges for the new age energy transition with electric vehicle technology. Before I conclude, I would like to request all the participants who are attending this program. We are having a All India Mechanical Engineering Convention on December 9th and 10th at Hyderabad in the same deep national seminar on advances in battery technologies for electric and hybrid vehicles. So I request all the engineers on Mechanical Division Board to register and attend this 2 days national convention at Hyderabad. And before I conclude, I would like to thank Dr. Sandeep Kumar Dev, Vice President of IEA. Very nice to see you, sir, in the webinar. I welcome now and go to Mr. Anirban Datta, moderator. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And we will be eager to participate in the National Convention of Mechanical Engineers, which is a flagship event of the IEA. And we are very much delighted to have right now our Vice President, Mr. Engineer Sandeep Kumar Dev, a man of many parts, and not only a civil engineer by profession, but a valuer and architect, member of Council of Architecture, and governing body member of the Institution of Valuers, All India governing body member, and immediate past chairman of the West Bengal Science Center, and presently the All India Vice President of IEI. So I would request Engineer Dev to share a few words.
Thank you very much, Anirban, for these very, very good words for me. And I must welcome on behalf of West Bengal State Center to the Chairman, Mechanical Engineering Division, my old friend, Dr. N.T. Rangareddy. Well, if you can see his card, you can see that how many different, activities he performed. I don't know how a person can, spare time in so many arenas. But thanks, my friend, to be there in the webinar. And I believe it will be a wonderful success by your presence. I must thank Dr. Shobhik Bhattacharya to be here by the invitation of our Institution of Engineers. And I believe that the way the Mechanical Engineering Division of West Bengal State Center is performing is just wonderful. Not for this year, but for the last few years, they are really doing remarkable performance. During the COVID period, they have made one after another wonderful webinars, and now they are doing all these things. And everybody were really, really astonished to see the quality of the webinar. There may be a number of webinars, but quality always speaks. And they have involved such an wonderful international personalities on a wonderful topic is just mesmerizing. So I believe that in continuation of the previous webinars, these webinars will be a wonderful success for all the viewers, for all the attendees, and for all of us who know very little about these things. And we are eager to hear the speakers here. So without wasting much time, once again, congratulations to all of you for organizing such a wonderful event. Thank you very much.
It has been really great to hear those extremely nice words from our Vice President. But I'd like to mention the person practically majority of these words to whom these words are attributable to. He is none other than our convener, Engineer Bhaskar Datta. Engineer Bhaskar Datta, a business consultant and past Vice President of the Thysense Group, and really in real sense, in true sense, an industry veteran. And above all, he is a crusader for the cause of climate change and energy transition, and strong believer of country-specific and economy-specific energy transition policy. So I would request now Engineer Bhaskar Datta to say a few words that why the West Bengal State Center of IEI has chosen this particular area of climate change and energy transition policy for, and why this series of lecture, what are the background of this series of lectures organized by the IEI West Bengal State Center Mechanical Engineering Division. And also I would request Mr. Engineer Bhaskar Datta to introduce Mr. Shobhik Bhattacharya, our theme speaker of today's session, in front of the audience. Over to you, Mr. Bhaskar Datta.
Good afternoon to everybody who are all present here at the webinar. Good afternoon to all participants, attendees, and all who would listen to this webinar, because it is getting recorded on the YouTube, which will be circulated. And I'm sure all people would be encouraged, would be motivated to understand the complexity of the climate change which is looming large on this planet. If at all the civilization, the human growth or human population has to survive in this planet, irrespective of the geographical location, I must say that my understanding of climate change is a great issue which needs to be emphasized to even the bottommost part of the population across countries. With this idea, we as Mechanical Engineering Division, with the motivation of this young fellow and energetic fellow, as told by N.T. Rangareddy, Anirban, I evolved this this is the fourth webinar which is happening. The first three webinars have also been uploaded in the YouTube, and one can possibly listen to that. The purpose of this organizing this subject on a webinar platform is to bring in awareness of climate change looming large on this planet. I read a book by one gentleman called Simon Mundy, who has written a book called Race for Tomorrow. And he has brought in a subject of Bangladesh also being affected by the climate change issues and migration and funding of the climate change, and the haves have to shell out certain amount of money towards the have-nots or the developing or underdeveloped countries. I have heard Mia Mottley, the Barbados Prime Minister, who has spoken very, very aggressively in the COP26 meeting, and she has come up with a logical distribution of the funding from the haves. There are a lot of commitments being given in terms of billions and trillions of dollars, but the actual fund flow is actually stuck for some reason or the other. There are complexities, but that is the secondary part. The first part is that what is this climate change? And possibly it needs to be emphasized to the general public through this audience of Institution of Engineers. I thought that this is possibly one of the very good platform for someone to listen to these complexities, these how to mitigate, and it is necessary. I am already at the fag end of 60s, about to reach 70, and maybe a couple of years are there, but generation next, they have to definitely face all these problems. So it is from that point of view, this webinar series was organized. This is the fourth one, and we are grateful that Mr. Sobhik Bhattacharya, who brings in a lot of experience and a lot of work with him behind this climate change mitigation and climate change issues and complexities. We have got him, and he has kindly agreed to come on the board to share his views on it. So he has chosen a topic of electric vehicle, but I'm sure that he will cover a host of other things also in this webinar, because the electric vehicle is there, but how to get the energy for the electric vehicle, whether it is a green energy or it is again some kind of an energy which actually creates a carbon footprint into the atmosphere. So those are things which possibly creates the complexity of the use of the electric vehicle. And lithium has to be mined. So the mining industry is also under stress. So from this point of view, we are eager to. Sobhik Bhattacharya is a master's degree holder for economics from the Jawaharlal Nehru, and then he is also a global economic fellow of Kiel Institute of Global Economic, Kiel, Germany. He was the young fellow, and he has n number of assignments in terms of the strategy decisions of this country, as well as from the global point of view. He's also a member of the contributor in the UNEP, and he has host of other things. He brings in a rich experience of 15 years, and this 15 years is a quality 15 years. I have actually 46 years of experience, but I would think that these 15 years is so much engrossing on a subject which possibly demands a bit of a better attention from the general public, including the educated cross-section of this country. I heard Dr. S. Jaishankar talking about this climate change in a Australian University Lowy Institute. And he was also mentioning about this climate change, and he was also mentioning about India is on the wrong side in terms of the climate change. So from all these background, we are eager to hear out Mr. Sobhik Bhattacharya, which will be definitely absorbing deliberations from his side, and we will be eager to listen to him. So without any further words, I think I have tried to give you the background on which the Mechanical Engineering Division of West Bengal State Committee under the leadership of Nirmal Das, Vice President Mr. Sandeep Dev, and then N.T. Rangareddy, with all their support, this could have been organized. So thank you, Anirban. Can you take it forward?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Datta, and you have very nicely and very lucidly you have explained our motive, our driving force behind this topic, organizing programs, organizing events on these topics. And as far as the energy sector is concerned, energy sector has a very close coupling, very close linkage with environment and vice versa. And environment and climate change, that is not, it is often a misnomer that climate change is an issue to be dealt with environmentalists only. To us, the answer is no. Climate change impacts all cross sections of the society, not only the engineering or technological or science fraternity, but all segments of professionals. So today we are fortunate enough to have Mr. Bhattacharya with us, and he carries a legacy from an organization who practically pioneered the policy making in the field of energy, environment, and many industrialization changeovers. So I now request Mr. Bhattacharya to share his deliberation with us, and I believe that we all will be enlightened with his session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Datta, for your words. I'm able to find a lot of distinguished delegates and experts who are much more knowledgeable to me. So definitely it's an honor for me to present whatever little work that we are doing across various aspects of sustainability, and in the transport sector, and focusing on electric vehicles is something that we have just started working. But there is also an equal opportunity for me to learn from the deliberations after I'm done with the presentation. And I feel that those inputs will equally be important and even critical in terms of making some valuable inputs to the work that we are doing in Delhi. So, first of all, before I start with my presentation, I would extend my sincere thanks to Anirban for extending this invitation and requesting me to present on a topic that has significant sustainability implications, particularly in India. So I was just trying to understand what could be a relevant topic. So because there's a lot of discussion around electric vehicles, so I would try to bring the positive dimensions and also to some extent the challenges, particularly in the electric vehicle sector, and maybe what is the government thinking and how we should take the sector in a manner it has not only addresses the environmental sustainability concerns, but equally important to focus on is the social aspect. So some bit of the social aspect I will touch upon, but it would largely be on the environmental aspects. So with your permission, Chairman, sir, I would like to start with my presentation. Yeah. So Anirban, just wanted to check, do you want me to share or you would be sharing?
You can share. No,
I
yeah.
made one change in the deck that I had shared with you. So the rest is like almost the
Okay, no
same.
issue. No issue.
Okay, okay. I hope my slide is visible to everybody.
Yes, yes, it's of course visible.
Okay, okay. So thank you so much. So the title of my presentation is the sustainability opportunities and challenges for the electric vehicles towards energy transition. The topic is very close to me, particularly from the fact that I have been always very excited with the transport sector right from my childhood. And although we did some work after I joined Terry after spending a small stint at a private multinational consulting company. Largely, and when I started working in the transport sector, one of the first things that I could understand was the fact that although the transport sector, the road transport sector, or even for that matter, the entire transport sector is not so much of a consumer of energy. So if you look at the entire energy consumption of the transport sector, it's 1/4 to 1/5 of the total energy that is consumed in the country. But if we look at also the GHG emission from the sector, it's around 10 to 12%, not more than that. Interestingly, it has received a lot of attention for a number of reasons. And obviously, one of the reasons that have been, and obviously, I am actually staying in that part of the country which has been very much in the news, particularly during this time of the year because of the environment pollution and a lot of tailpipe emission coming in, leading to a lot of people getting exposed to environmental pollution, particularly the local pollution and disease burden and death. So, what is important from that perspective is that although it may not have a significant contribution from the energy perspective, but the kind of contribution it has from the road transport as a percentage of the overall transport sector, the road transport is the largest contributor within the transport. It's almost like around 91% of the GHG emission that is arising from the transport is attributable to the road transport sector. Although the numbers of like impact on health is contested, so it's around 74,000, which is kind of given estimated by the World Health Organization so far the impacts of local pollution on human health are concerned. So it's quite obvious that the need for aligning the transport sector with the larger environmental aspirations of the country should be achieved. And with the COP26, where the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister of India announced at Glasgow that India would be achieving carbon neutrality by 2070. So as the responsibility lies with other sectors, transport sector also has to play a kind of an equal role and has its own important share in contributing towards the desired objective. But if we see the kind of technologies that are needed in order to bring this transition is not easy. And obviously, it will require a lot of capital. It will require a lot of research and development, infrastructure, manpower, and different kind of skilling that are required in order to ensure that the transport sector is able to have the right kind of human resources to operate in a most efficient manner. Much of these kind of challenges that we see would be best understood through what kind of choices we are making given the plethora of technological options we have. But the real challenge we see is that how we are making the choice of technologies. Is it like only at certain parts, bits and parts? Mostly people tend to focus on what is visible, say for example, the tailpipe emission. Okay, so a typical vehicle is having a tailpipe emission, so you try to move towards a alternate kind of a product technology that will not lead to any kind of a tailpipe emission. Definitely appreciated, but it should also ensure that there is no burden shifting from the tailpipe emission to somewhere in the product or the product life cycle, either in the upstream or in the downstream segment. Now, if I look at the Indian transport sector, in fact, it's the fifth largest in the world and expected to be becoming the third largest by 2030, and catering to a kind of a huge domestic market. And with a lot of policy initiatives being announced in recent years, largely in the form of FAME 1 and FAME 2, we have seen that more than 0.5 million electric two-wheelers are on road, although the number of electric cars have not been significant. So, and it is still less than 1% of the annual vehicle sales. However, the industry has the potential to grow, definitely, than 5% in the near future. And with 100% foreign direct investment coming in the sector, there are schemes like FAME 2. Then we have the HCNG, the green hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles, and most importantly, the SATAT scheme, which is a way how the government of India is actually promoting the use of biogas in the rural context, because even SATAT is envisaged to be a game changer because of the unprecedented social and environmental benefits that it can bring compared to some of the other competing technologies, and largely because of the huge feedstock that we have in the rural settings. And since most of the proportion of this demand of mobility will arise, particularly in the rural sector, so this is also considered as a kind of a parallel alternative to promote sustainability with the transport sector. Now, in fact, there was a report which was published in 2018. It's a very important, interesting report called the Transforming India's Mobility. And the imperative of sustainable transformation is based on basically the 3 C's. It talks about the convenience, the cleanliness or clean, and the congestion free. So the convenience is defined as a kind of a transition towards seamless, safe, and affordable transport system, and calls for a holistic assessment around the transition. So, and that's where it is actually talking about the availability of affordable technology to the rural and urban centers. Interestingly, a number of programs have also been announced by the government in recent times to even improve the rural connectivity. And I'm talking about the rural connectivity for short, because the fact that much of our discussions have been around urban. So I would also like to give equal emphasis to the fact that there is a huge consumer base in the rural areas, and it is our responsibility to ensure that the environmental sustainable transition in the transport sector is also ensured that should cater to the rural needs. So it talks about the utilization of the self-help groups in the National Rural Livelihoods Mission, which aims to promote safe, affordable, and community monitored road transport services, particularly in the remote locations. So I think the overall approach by the government towards ensuring, on one hand, that we are able to decarbonize and depollute the transport sector, but at the same time competing schemes that are also promoting to ensure that the rural people are not segregated or not left out in this entire process. And there are also equal emphasis that have been provided to ensure that they are able to enjoy this entire developmental path as we move towards the deeper decarbonization process. Sorry. So now, because I talked about the environmental impact assessment, the technological solutions obviously will have a significant, economic viability and commercial viability of many of these technologies definitely will play a very important role. But what is equally important, and because the larger objective of this transition is all about decarbonization and mitigating the climate change. So the environmental impact along the entire product life cycles is important for us to understand. Now, the question is, how do we do it? Are there any kind of a single model or tool which can be used, or a plethora of options? And if they do have a plethora of options, which would be the ideal method or model that should be adopted in the Indian context? So if I look at the kind of literature published globally in the global north as well as in the global south, there are predominantly 5 or 6 models that are used to undertake integrated sustainability assessments for the transport sector. So one of them, which is being developed by the Argonne Lab of US, called the GREET model. It's greenhouse gases, regulated emissions, and energy use in the transport sector. It's a good model, and it's used for an attribution methodology. So I'm not going into the details of it, but it is largely limited to energy and emission impact categories during the use phase. Although now they are expanding it to bring in the impacts associated during the component manufacturing stage or even the mining activities. But the database is still kind of focused to the developed country and may not be used or even have any relevance for the developing country context. There is this trigger model, which is relatively easy, a kind of a spreadsheet tool, wherein you have these estimates and just external estimate numbers need to be fed in, and one can get the impact associated largely with the greenhouse gas emissions. We do have the Gabi, which is a very popular life cycle assessment tool, but however, it doesn't have much of a flexibility. There is an Umberto, and finally, which is being very predominantly used in the private sector, in the academia and research community, is the life cycle assessment tool, which is the CIMAPRO. It's a leading software package having its application around various sectors spanning 200 to 120 countries. It comes with the latest EcoInvent database and covering around 10,000 processes. So you can understand that how detailed the processes are in terms of looking at the various stages of the entire production, consumption, and end of life value chain. So now this particular study, which I'm actually presenting, is from the perspective of undertaking a very detailed life cycle assessment, which follows the International Standard Organization 1440 kind of impact assessment, looking at 18 environmental impact categories and 3 endpoint categories across various type of fuels and products. Now, possibly this had been not possible had we not been able to partner with GIZ. So I think that's where we decided to come together and undertake this exercise. And possibly this is the first of its kind exercise being undertaken in India because it has 2-3 uniqueness. One, we have gone beyond greenhouse gases because environmental sustainability is not only about GHG emission. It has also implication on various other environmental impact categories. So we are trying to capture those environmental impact categories. And the second aspect which we have tried to do is capture the end of life, because most of the studies that are existing in India, in fact, undertake largely the use phase. To some extent, in recent literature, we see studies capturing the upstream. But what we have done, not only looking at the upstream and the middle stream, but also looking at the downstream and the end of life. So that's the uniqueness of the studies. And thirdly, we are trying to capture not only the 4-wheelers, but also the 3-wheelers, and the 3 and the 4-wheelers would be like kind of assessed together. Although, like, because of the paucity of time, I would confine myself only to the 4-wheelers, and would be happy to respond if there are any questions that may come up during the Q&A session, including the 3-wheel types. Now, what is a life cycle assessment? So it's a very interesting framework which has been developed to take care, to understand, assess, and evaluate, and then take interventions to ensure that the entire activities along the product life cycle stages are minimized, particularly which has significant environmental impacts. So what we see is, basically a kind of a tool that takes care of the extraction and consumption of various resources, including energy as well as released to the environment in the form of air, water, soil, which are all kind of quantified at all stages. So there can be two ways of doing the quantification. One, you can take simple literature data from established database. The other option is that you have either pilots to collect the data, or you engage with the industry or regulatory entities to have the data, not exactly in the form which are being reported, but yes, to mask it in a manner that there are no disclosure, but at the same time, we are able to capture at least the reality and not something which is very academic or may not have some realistic relevance or something like that. So typically the ISO 14040 talks about three major steps of undertaking any life cycle assessment. The first one is the goal and the scope definition. The second one, the life cycle inventory analysis. The third one is the life cycle impact assessment, inventory impact assessments. And then based on the results, one does the interpretation and do a kind of a sensitivity or hot pot analysis to see that what kind of improvements that are possible in terms of bringing, say, either you improve circularity by bringing secondary materials in the process, or maybe bringing renewable energy in the system, or maybe going for local procurement rather than international procurement. So, so these are the various sensitivities that can be brought into test to what extent those interventions are sensitive to or bring the right kind of environmental improvement of that product. So, and based on the impact, the scale of impact that these interventions have, it would be like kind of listed out in order of their largest benefits. And the corresponding investments that are needed can also be brought in, and one can look at the cost effectiveness of the various interventions and prioritize them in terms of how much benefit one is able to get so far environmental aspects are concerned by bringing certain amount of investments, right? So it's all about like the cost efficiency. So here also we are talking about the cost effectiveness of various interventions to bringing the desired environmental improvements in the technology or the products or the services. Now, if I look at the impact categories, so typically what it happens is that if I'm going to do a life cycle assessment of a vehicle, right? So I consider a vehicle of a specific category of a specific year with certain specifications in terms of its engine size, curb weight, its whether it's kind of a commercial or a passenger segment, and so on and so forth. And once I have identified the goal and the scope of the product, then I try to map the system boundary in terms of what are the things that are considered in the analysis and what are the things that I'm not going to consider for the analysis. So this is very important, and it helps in giving a very clear message that what are the things that have been included for which the impacts are estimated and what have been not considered. So once I have the kind of life cycle stages are defined, then we try to identify what are the different variables for which the data needs to be collected. And that collection can be either done from primary survey or it can be done from the review of literature. At times, there is this EcoInvent database, which the software provides. And quite often in the absence of availability of any data, one can basically fetch the data from the database to undertake this exercise. And the database is quite robust because because it contains, it is based on extreme peer review process, and it has been kind of used in many international documents for policy context and regulatory and environmental benchmarking. So from that perspective, those databases are very relevant in the context of using them in case if we are not able to find any primary data. So each stage of the product life cycle, say for example, in our case, it would be kind of an extraction, the manufacturing and the use, data on emissions in the environment, including, say, maybe the CO2 or the benzene or the organic chemicals or inorganic chemicals. There can be resources that would be used, both ferrous and non-ferrous materials, and also other kind of non-metallic materials, plastics, composites, and resins, which are used in typical products. And each emission in the environment and resource used are then characterized in terms of the potential impact in the life cycle assessment. So the impacts are broadly categorized into 18 major categories. So here I'm not showing all of them, but you can see some of these categories, like you have the climate change, which is arising from GHG emission. You have the eutrophication, you have the land use change, because if you have depletion of resources, it will definitely have an implication on the land use. If there are resources which are scarce and where resources are extracted, it will definitely have an impact on the overall resource scarcity. Then acidification, then ozone depletion, ecotoxicity, ionizing radiation, photochemical formation, water depletion, and human toxicity. So these are the broad categories or the impact categories on which the outcome of the life cycle analysis is presented. And finally, because these would be in different units, so some would be in CO2 equivalent, some would be in phosphorus equivalent, some in sulfur equivalent, some in nitrogen equivalent. So they have to be like kind of collated, and there are normalizing factors which are used to in fact compile the relevant indicators to arrive at a relatively smaller composite level under three heads: human health, the ecosystem health, as well as the natural resources. Of late, many companies, what they are doing is to have a unique number. They are further normalized and made unit free to give a kind of a single score to the product. But quite often, that single score might be useful at times for decision making. But there might be challenges, because in the process of doing this normalization, we might, in the process, may give undue advantage to certain environmental indicators, or avoid the relevance of maybe some environmental indicators which are very critical. So anyways, in a nutshell, what is done in a life cycle assessment is that on one hand, a set of results are developed which gives a very detailed list of impact, but from an administrative and strategic point of view, quite often they are compiled and presented in a single number to do a kind of a very holistic comparison across products, processes, technologies, and services. So now if I look at the pathways in which it affects, so you can see the midpoint impact categories, which are the particulate matter emissions which are happening, or the ozone formation, ionizing radiation, human toxicity, and so on and so forth. So these are the midpoint impact categories. So what are the damage that in fact it has on the overall ecosystem is basically captured in this intermediate process. Although this is not presented, but it happens at the back of the entire program. And finally, they present it in a kind of three broad categories: human health, ecosystems, and resource availability. Now, let me come to the most important part in the context of undertaking the life cycle stages of our powertrain technologies or fuel. So, as I mentioned, that this particular presentation that I'm making is focusing on four-wheelers, and we are largely considering two types of vehicles. What is the electric vehicles, and the other one is the IC vehicles. In case of IC vehicles, we have presented petrol, diesel, and CNG, but here we would be presenting largely the petrol and diesel. CNG, we do have the results, but I'm not doing it because of the paucity of time. But again, I would be more than happy to respond to any query or clarification that may come up. Now, typically what we see in the upstream materials for IC vehicles that comprise of almost 75 to 80% of the vehicular weight. Unless and until we have a significant share of that one, it becomes very difficult. So, and at the same time, we also have the upstream fuel cycle that considers the extraction, transportation of different types of fuel into India, and the data is procured from various primary and secondary sources. So that is the oil to tank kind of an analysis. So we are looking at the environmental impact associated with the oil processing. So whatever fuel would be going into the vehicle, what are the various processes that a typical crude that an oil undergoes before it is kind of delivered at the point of sale or at the point of delivery. So it includes the energy and the fuel extraction, the transportation, the processing, the mix of fuel which are used in India. Say, for example, we often talk about 80% or 82% of the product which are imported. So we try to also capture the share of the imported and domestic, because of the fact that the domestic fuel won't have the environmental burden of it being extracted in a different country and being transported through containers to India, rather than the imported ones which face this additional burden. Although once it lands from that point till the point of delivery, the environmental impact more or less for both the imported and domestic food would be the same, but it differs only so far the import element is concerned. And also finally, the transportation to the points of say delivery or sale. And the next part is the tank to wheel. It actually reflects that how a fuel which is there in the tank gets converted into energy, and at the same time we are looking at the conversion process leading to certain environmental impact. So it would be determined by what kind of fuel efficiency it has, what are the tailpipe emissions, what are the average life of the vehicle, what are the average vehicle kilometers during the product life, how frequently it is undergoing maintenance. So these would be the main aspects that will determine the overall impacts associated with the tank to wheel analysis. Now, this is so far the fuel is concerned, but there are also components which goes beyond fuels, which includes for an IC engine, the engine and the transmission and the fuel tank. In case of electric vehicles, it is very important that the two most important product or assembly that are considered for any electrical vehicle analysis are the electric battery, the battery management system, and the drive the motors. So for that one, we are considering the use of mining activities to extract various materials that go into manufacturing, the permanent magnets, the desired battery chemicals or the battery chemistries based on the country where they are available in plenty. And then during the use phase of the electricity is concerned, we are considering the mix, the generation of electricity from various sources and how it is kind of transmitted to the Indian grid, and the place where a typical electric vehicle is receiving the charging. Because depending on the kind of grid renewable energy mix in a specific date and also time of the day, it will determine the overall sustainability. Although there are average grid mix and carbon emission factors that are provided, but it might also vary over during the day and during the night, and also during the summers and during the winters. And then we have the end of life. The end of life largely takes care of the recycling of the lithium-ion batteries, recycling of other materials, including the rare earths. There might be situations wherein part of them might be going into incineration and landfilling. So we also have to take into consideration those activities, because even a small share of any of these components going into either incineration or landfilling will have environmental implications. So that needs to be captured. So this actually gives a kind of a better overview what I have just mentioned. As you can see on the left hand side, it includes the IC, and on the right hand side, what we see is basically the electric vehicles. So the upstream materials in the vehicle cycle would include the aluminum, steel manufacturing, both the alloyed and unalloyed. You have the rubbers, the plastics, the manganese, and the copper. Then we have the component manufacturing and the engine assembly. And then we have the upstream fuel cycle, which includes the fuel extraction, the transportation, and the refining. And during the use phase, we have these information, which I have already presented. And then looking at the end of life, three major processes that includes recycling, incineration, and landfilling. So far, the electric vehicles is concerned, in the upstreams, largely the lithium and the lithium salts, the aluminum, chromium steel, electric steel, ferrite, rubber, oxygen, plastic, cables, manganese, cobalt, nickel, copper, and rare earths are the key materials that go into manufacturing the batteries and the motors. And then we have the component manufacture, the battery and the motor assembly, and then we do have the fuel mix or the fuel stream impact associated with the Indian grid mix. Then during the use phase, where we try to look at it from the perspective of its range anxiety, how much amount of so this will actually vary from city to city, because quite often we tend to arrive at a very natural or a generic level conclusion. But our understanding is that because many of these parameters, particularly during the use phase, would be dependent on in which city these vehicles are driven. In a city like Delhi, where the travel average distance traveled is much higher, and that too in congestion, so possibly the kind of charging and discharging a vehicle will undergo in a day would be very different from that of, like, say, Kolkata, which is a kind of a much smaller city where the habitats are like mostly who are actually driving vehicles are mostly living within the city. But it may not be the case such in Delhi, or maybe in Mumbai, or maybe in Bangalore. So I think and that's the reason why we decided that let us not give a kind of a very generic estimates, but we take up one city, and which is the city of Delhi, because most of the use phase data, they come from the primary surveys, from the surveys that we undertake at the parking lots, or at the charging station points, or even at the fueling station points. So most of this data that we have used for our analysis come from the primary surveys based on our interaction with the OEMs, with the workshop engineers, as well as with the consumers. Now, it's very interesting to see that before I go to presenting the India results, what does the global findings actually talk about? Because in India, the such kind of an analysis is very rare, very rare. In fact, that's the reason we decided to go into it. It's only like in the last few years, very few studies have been published. And I think the best study that has come till date, I would say, has been that that was published very recently in the Nature on life cycle assessment on the impact of various kind of vehicles. And there they have actually presented the India's GHG reduction potential of electric four-wheelers, principally dependent on the time and location where they are charged. So it has been observed that the reduction in the overall emission per kilometer can be as high as 40%, depending on at what time of the day this vehicle is charged, right? And in certain cases, it has been found to increase compared to the traditional vehicle. But nonetheless, the objective was to, in fact, determine these sensitivities. But the limitation of the study, and I find that they have only focused and presented on the GHG emission, ignoring the impacts associated with the other environmental parameters. But largely, this has not been the case in such assessments in other countries. And I think one of the good studies which we have come across was done in the European Union in 2015, where based on the carbon intensity of the European Union electricity grid mix, the well-to-wheel emission of a typical mid-sized battery electric vehicle were found to be in the range of 60 to 76 gram of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilometer. And this is between 47% and 58% lower than the vehicles of a typical comparable category. And the report, the estimate that have been found for the typical IC vehicles, where something in the range of 140 to 150 gram CO2 equivalent. So it clearly indicates that yes, there is an opportunity for reduction. There is definitely a reduction in the GHG emission in case of battery electric, and here I am talking about only the battery electric vehicles, no plug-in hybrid or smart or like pure hybrid vehicles. So doing a kind of a comparison purely between the battery electric vehicles and the IC vehicles, and we see a significant improvement in the GHG emission. There are a few other studies that have also tried to assess that what it implies when it comes to the number of kilometers that a typically electric vehicle has to run to ensure that it is able to perform environmentally more sustainable compared to the IC vehicles, largely because the typical environmental footprint of electric vehicles in the upstream is 3 to 4 times higher than what we see in an electric vehicle, an IC vehicle. So for example, if I look at it from the point of view of GHG emission associated with manufacturing engines or transmission, then including gear and engine, then the total GHG emission associated with manufacturing these two components is somewhere in the range of 300 to 400 kilograms for a typical vehicle. But if I have to find the GHG emission associated with manufacturing battery as well as motors for a vehicle of a comparable category, then the total GHG emission would be close to 900 kilograms and or 1000 kilograms. So it's around 3 to 4 times. So in the upstream, you have a sheer disadvantage so far the electric vehicles are concerned. But that disadvantage is to a large extent mitigated during the use phase, which is relatively environment friendly compared to the IC vehicles. So in a way, you have to drive a long distance to ensure that whatever emission that has taken place in the upstream is kind of neutralized or mitigated by extending the life and the range. And that is the reason why there has been so much emphasis on increasing the performance and range of these vehicles. The EVs are beneficial. So there has been a lot of these exercises undertaken by authors to see in which country, what would be the minimum distance that the electric vehicles should be there on roads to ensure that it becomes sustainable. So in case of Europe, it was 150,000 kilometers in a recent study. It has been found that in case of Germany, it is somewhere between 150 to 150,000 to 160,000 kilometers. Similarly, in case of the United States, they have found it to be somewhere in the range of 85,000 miles to 95,000 miles. So another study which has been kind of undertaken in India, which actually is very different. I think that's one of the recent studies which gives a very different interpretation or finding compared to the traditional finding, which it says that 0.27 kilogram of CO2 equivalent of per kilometer of emission is observed for petrol and 0.24 kilogram of CO2 emission for diesel. But in the case of electric vehicles, it is 0.37 kilogram due to the high rated battery component and the relatively high grid emission factor, because we are yet to decarbonize the overall grid. So I will come maybe towards the end of my presentation in terms of this UNITS-CAT 62 position or situation in terms of how we take care of the decarbonization of the grid on one hand, and on the other hand, there are certain environmental impacts associated with the electric vehicle. So how do we balance these two in a most efficient manner? So I do have a suggestion to make to the today's community for more transition to a sustainable transition towards the automotive sector in the country. And finally, as I mentioned about this exercise undertaken in the US, using the GREET model and using the average US GREET-based electricity, the electric vehicles were found to be sustainable if they travel more than 100,000 miles. Now, here I'm going to share some very interesting findings from the European Union case study. And as you can see that in case of the European Union, there is no doubt that a typical battery electric vehicle with a typical European electricity mix will have a significant advantage. So they have all been normalized and scored between 0 and 1. So it has the best performance. So lower the score on the vertical axis, the better the performance of that particular vehicle. But if that particular electricity which is being used in the battery electric vehicle is, if it had to come from 100% coal, then the total impact would have been significant. So this becomes the reference point, and with regard to this reference point, the paper tries to capture that how much reduction is achieved if the European electricity grid mix is used. And then if we consider the IC vehicle from diesel and the IC vehicle that is gasoline. So here we see a kind of a sheer benefit so far the GHG emissions concerned. But let's see some of the findings that they have for other indicators. Now, human toxicity, which is both carcinogenic as well as non-carcinogenic impacts, we see that both the battery electric vehicles, both operating under the current European electricity mix, as well as the ideal had it been 100% coal, then it would have been significantly higher, even higher than gasoline. So the least is the diesel, followed by the gasoline, and then you have the European electricity mix and an electricity mix if 100% of that electricity is coming from coal. Similarly, if we look at the freshwater toxicity, so because there's a lot of like water consumption which happens during the mining of some of the battery materials, as well as during the end of life. So management of particularly cleaning process. So we do have a lot of water consumption. And that is the reason why we see that the impact is almost like kind of 2.5 times of that what we see for IC diesel or IC gasoline. So for a country like India, which is already water scarce, what kind of message that this particular finding has? Obviously, it makes more sense to actually go for water recycling. But bulk of this water has already been consumed in a different country because most of the mining doesn't take place in India. So it has a water implication in a different country, but definitely it is embodied in that product itself. Then we have the terrestrial acidification and the freshwater eutrophication. So here we see that the terrestrial acidification relatively is better compared to what we have in case of diesel, because the deeper blue is the diesel and the lighter blue is the kind of petrol. So again, the battery electric vehicles is operating or performing somewhere in between the diesel as well as in the petrol. But nonetheless, its performance is still worse compared to what diesel is. And finally, the freshwater eutrophication, again, the battery electric vehicle has the highest impact, followed by the petrol and the diesel version. Now, with this findings, the question is that, so what do we have for India? So what I'm going to do is the remaining slides I have kind of categorized into these four broad categories. So there are certain impact parameters where the electric vehicles score better over the IC vehicles. There would be, and that I'm going to present. And then we have certain parameters where the electric vehicles performance is weak compared to the IC counterparts. I have also done a composite analysis to ensure that all the parameters are kind of integrated and we have a unique and composite score for electric vehicle. Unfortunately, I haven't seen a single study which has presented this composite score of all the 16 or 17 parameters, but they have not presented it. But that doesn't mean that it can't be presented. There has been selective reporting of the numbers. And obviously, if I present that number, it definitely doesn't go in favor of the electric vehicles. It goes against the electric vehicles. So that's the reason why I'm not actually presenting it, because there is some bit of understanding is needed within the group. So far, the composite numbers are concerned. Finally, we go into the understanding of the possible factors that lead to such variation in results. So obviously, it's very good to at least look at some of the parameters where electric vehicle has performed really well. But there are also areas where it may not be happening directly within the political boundary, but definitely in the entire value chain, it has its impacts. And wherever the demand of electric vehicle will arise, not only in India, maybe in other countries, ultimately the mining countries will get affected. So objective is not to confine within the political boundary, but ensure that how these good practices also spill over and ensure that it is not a specific country who is benefited in the transition by improving in the upstream processes, but also like the global fraternity or the global community, they are able to also leverage the benefit that may arise from improving the upstreams. And then finally, I go to the mitigation strategy towards making the road transport truly sustainable. So let's see what we have so far. The GHG emissions are concerned. Now, as you can see, we have presented the results into 4 major categories. We have the total category, total impact. We have the upstream. We have the use phase. We have the end of life, right? So if we look at the kind of impact that we are getting during the processes, now it's interesting to see that the total environmental GHG footprint for the electric vehicle per kilometer would be around 20,000. The total emission would be around 20,784 kilogram of equivalent. Now, obviously, the end of life is negative, largely because there are 2 parts to it. One is wherein you are emitting when the recycling process is happening. But at the same time, in a typical life cycle assessment, it takes into consideration that whatever material is recycled and is brought back into the system, so much equivalent of primary material is not required. So whatever energy and material consumption that is going into recycling the primary material which reached the end of life is not outweighing the impact associated with the mining activity. So this is definitely encouraging. So so as we move on, it is very important that we try to reduce the overall impact associated with the decline. So far, the IC diesel is concerned, we see that the impact, particularly along the end of life, is not so much, because we are not able to really gainfully improve upon the replacement of the primary material. But definitely during the use phase, it has a significant impact. And in case of diesel, I think the total impact is even higher. So you can actually see that the total impact across the different life cycle stages for these 3 different product categories. And it is very clear that the electric vehicle has the least GHG emission, followed by the IC four-wheeler diesel, and then we have the IC four-wheeler petrol. Now, there are also other beneficial impacts towards electric vehicles that we see. So far, the carcinogenic toxicity is concerned, ionizing radiation, and ozone depletion. So if I benchmark electric vehicle four-wheeler impact at a level, So the impact that we see for the stratospheric ozone depletion, ionizing radiation, and human carcinogenic toxicity, they are considerably higher in case of four-wheeler diesel and four-wheeler petrol. Now, there is a typo here. My apologies. It would have been this all four categories. But in case of other categories, environmental impact categories that we see, electric vehicle, four-wheeler, IC four-wheeler diesel, and IC four-wheeler petrol, the terrestrial acidification, the terrestrial ecotoxicity, mineral resource scarcity, fossil and water consumption, they are very, very different in the sense that the impact associated with these four different environmental categories are very high for electric vehicles, particularly when it comes to terrestrial acidification and terrestrial ecotoxicity and mineral resource security, because most of the resources that are going into manufacturing the batteries and the motors, they are not found in abundance. So any extraction from a limited resource will indicate a kind of increased scarcity in the future. And that is the reason why we see that for the electric vehicles, the mineral resource scarcity is so high compared to the other two, because most of the materials which are going into manufacturing these products are relatively available in abundance compared to this. So is the toxicity because of the mining activities, and I'll come to some of these results interpretation in the subsequent slide. Water consumption is also quite high, as you can see, because of the fact that many of the processes which are used in the EV manufacturing processes is very water intensive. So for a policymaker, it would be very confusing to decide that on one hand, there are certain indicators which are showing a significant political positive finding, where electric vehicle is very encouraging. But on the other hand, we do see certain indicators where the performance is not encouraging. So this can be done or interpreted in many ways. Now, two most important way how it can be done is you come out with a composite score, and you see that at the composite level for all the 18 indicators, whether electric vehicle performs better or worse compared to the other one. So that's one way of doing it. The second way of doing it is, okay, so while on one hand, I know where it is actually improving, but at the same time, there are certain indicators where we see that there are significant impacts. And then I try to trace it back to that particular step of the manufacturing process wherein these impacts can be having the largest attribution. And then I try to see how I can reduce this attribution through appropriate interventions. And that's what we have done. We have done both the composite analysis as well as the attribution analysis to find out how such impacts happening and how that can be mitigated. So I'm not presenting the composite score as of now because of some improvement that it might have. But nonetheless, I would in the future definitely share it with you once the paper is published. Now, what are the challenges that we foresee or see as when we compare these different results? So the coal tends to be one of the critical factors. And the reason electric vehicles look like an appealing climate change is that if we can make our grid zero carbon, nothing like it. So whatever like kind of emission that we are able to see here, it will like kind of significantly decline over time. So that's one of the ways how we can do it. In one of the recent studies, it shows that if we have to reduce the 20% in the overall greenhouse gas emission of electric vehicles, the carbon intensity of electricity has to be less than 500 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. Or if we have to achieve a 50% reduction in the greenhouse gas emission, it has to come down to 350 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. So it means that from whatever we see, it has to come down by around, because the current grid is somewhere in the range of 0.79 to 0.82. So it has to be like kind of kilogram of CO2. So it has to reduce by more than 50% to ensure that we are able to achieve the 50% emission reduction. And further making it environmentally sustainable. So as I mentioned that it means 46 and 62% below the current electricity carbon intensity level, implying a kind of a near-term and rapid phasing out of coal from the power sector. Now that's another problem or a kind of another issue that we are actually touching upon. The second aspect, which is like many other batteries, the lithium-ion cells that are that power most of the electric vehicles rely on not on raw materials, including the cobalt, the lithium, and the rare earth elements that have been linked to a lot of environmental and human rights concerns. And that's the reason we see a kind of a higher impact on some of the environmental impact categories because of the hazardous nature of extracting metal from these ores. And in particular, cobalt has been extremely problematic because almost 70% of the cobalt globally is sourced from DRC, everybody knows, and that too from artisanal mining. It's not a large scale mining. We're talking about medium to small scale mining, which is happening and which is leading to poor capital infusion and very hazardous exposure, leading to a lot of health and other environmental problems. So there are hazardous tailings and slags that can leach into the environment. So we keep on seeing a lot of like literature that has very clearly talked about all the environmental hazards, and to a large extent that gets reflected in the scores. If we look at lithium and the kind of countries from where it is sourced, it's largely from Australia, where from salt flats in the Andean regions, or maybe from the Argentina or Bolivia, largely in South America, where it requires a lot of groundwater. And water required for producing batteries, it means that the manufacturing electric vehicle is all about 50 or 60% more than what the typical IC counterpart will have. So that is also very evident from the fact that whatever water consumption we are seeing here, it's like kind of more, it's almost double that what we are actually talking about in case of say petrol or diesel, if not exactly double, but maybe close to double. Then deposits of rare earths, as we see, is largely concentrated in China and often have these radioactive substances that can emit radioactive water and dust. And most importantly, so far the recycling of these materials is concerned, it uses either hydrometallurgical process or the pyrometallurgical process. And although there are talking about a hybrid of these two, but largely they use not only energy, particularly the pyrometallurgical processes, and the kind of energy that they are using in most cases, they are captive power plant, which are coming largely from fossil fuel. So that will definitely increase the overall GHG emission. And obviously the use of chemicals which are coming from the traditional processes will also have its own environmental implications. Finally, the recycling rates of electric vehicles, if you like it globally, it's very low. In case of say lead acid batteries, is somewhere between 90 to 95, or even in US, it is as 99%. But EV batteries recycling rates are quite low. And there are also limited number of players. Although there we have seen few players, including the Atero of the India, where are expanding their presence in South India and even like going into the European Union. But largely it's still low as of now. So as we see more players, possibly the recycling rate increases and makes more relevant and important to increase overall recycling. Finally, how do we move forward? Now, obviously, as I mentioned, and I think one of the fundamental objectives of today's discussion is the traditional dichotomy one faces on one hand in terms of pushing renewable to reduce the GHG emission of electric vehicles, but it comes at the cost of coal, which is available in abundance. So the question is that the right way of like utilizing coal, or there are much better ways of actually utilizing coal, wherein you may have coal gasification process through which you are producing, say, methanol, and from there, methane reforming route, you are able to produce hydrogen. So hydrogen fuel cells, or so we are also trying to do an analysis looking at the clean coal technologies to see that whether this particular route introducing hydrogen will have better impact on the GHG footprint or not. Now, the point is that should we only be focusing on electric vehicles, possibly for certain segments, but definitely not for all segments. Given the diverse nature of the country, not that all products will have or present like promising results in the country. So it has to have a kind of a multitude of options in order to promote different kind of fuels or sustainable fuels for different category of vehicles. The bottom line strategy or the position that the government takes is to ensure that we are able to decouple our imports of petrol and diesel or crude oil from the oil exporting countries, which is very well appreciated and accepted because it has a lot of environmental and economic consequences. But nonetheless, it is also important that we do not fall into the trap of moving from one sort of imports of oil to like other form of import, including battery materials and rare earth materials. So I think that's where we need to have a very strong understanding and focus to see that how we are able to strategically take a conscious call to ensure that none in the players are affected, and we are able to, or maybe even if we are able to find the losers, their impact is kind of relatively minimal compared to what our thinking processes are. Battery recycling efficiency and commercialization has been very much in the news, particularly when the battery waste management and handling rules was recently again amended and introduced in August 2022. And they are also talking about certain benchmarking. So I think what it would be important is to have mandated recycled content in new products, which can be phased in gradually. So as the recycling capacities increase, as there are more materials into the system, we would be able to bring in more secondary materials, and maybe mandating would find lesser resistance among the OEMs compared to what we have seen. Promoting secondary life through stationary application. There are many pilots where use of old electric vehicle batteries are being used for grid storage, but it needs a lot of testing and ensure that they are able to perform reliable, because the life can be as long as 8 to 10 years. So we need like proper guidelines for testing and identification of those agencies who can do it. And what is the business model? Who will do it? How it will be procured? Will it need a kind of a different regulation to ensure that people who are operating in that space are able, whether consumers are able to be benefited from the business model while it is done in a proper regulatory acceptable manner. Then the promoting of the good manufacturing practices among the mining and the smelting communities of the OEMs through their global presence, so they can leverage their global presence to promote good mining and smelting communities, and maybe reflected in their sustainability reports. I think that's how consumers would be aware of it, and there would be a kind of a consumer pressure on the OEMs to ensure that they are able to have kind of a more sustainable supply chain. Do away with cobalt. Now that is something which is being developed, but I'm not very sure if there are good technologies that have been able to replace the cobalt completely or not. But finally, what is most important is a sustainable transport policy that has the right kind of incentive to provide the right technology mix. I'm talking about the mix, not the right technology mix at the right time, at the right location, providing very clear signals to all stakeholders. And that will bring in the right investments, the right intent, the right behavior, and then in fact help achieve the larger goal of decarbonizing the transport sector, and subsequently the NDC target of 2070 carbon neutrality. So thank you so much for your attention. I don't know if I've taken more time than what have been allocated. My apologies, but happy to respond to any questions that may come up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bhattacharya, for your excellent deliberation, and we all have been enlightened, and with your deliberation, and definitely there few questions which have appeared in the chat box, and also there are some questions and points which are directly linked with challenges for EV in particularly in Indian scenarios, shared by Mr. Shantanu Sengupta, the co-chairman of Mechanical Engineering Division of West Bengal State Center. Unfortunately, he has attended as a participant, but he could not be with us in the list of panelists today. But he has shared his points, and on which also we would like to discuss a few minutes. But prior to that, we have received a few questions from the members of the audience. Mr. Tapan Kumar Banerjee has requested to the speaker for a bit elaborating on Mr. Jani Das's findings, referring to your slide number 7.
Yeah, I think that the paper is available online. I can share the paper after the presentation, so one can look at it. But it is largely based on secondary data and possibly the grid emission factor that they have taken is, I have met her, I have discussed this one with her. So I'm not very sure, although it has been published in a very renowned edited book. So, and that's one of the few studies wherein I have come across which talks about electric vehicle having more emission than IC or diesel vehicles. Although a paper that was published in Nature, it talked about that if we break it up by region, north, east, south, and west, I will also, that paper is also available online, and they have taken quite an interesting product portfolio. They have taken Tata Nexon, they have taken Tata Tigor in the 4-wheel segment, and it says that in the eastern region, I think it is performing much. In the northern region, it is performing better, where the renewable energy grid mix is much better and having lower emission footprint or grid mix. But in other parts of the country, it may not be the same. And that is the reason we see the variation. Now, it all depends on what data we are taking, because these results are very data sensitive. The moment we take some different data of a specific state and try to say that, well, this is the India or the national picture, then in the process, we are actually conveying a very wrong message. So that approach is more important, to have regional specific diversity. And if there are reduction or in a specific region where the renewable energy grid mix is more, then it is important to encourage some of the other states where the renewable energy grid mix is less, if we at all want to promote EVs, particularly in the 4-wheel segment, which again is a kind of a strategy of the government. Then possibly apart from reducing the renewable energy, increasing the renewable energy mix, nothing can be done in the short run, because everything that we are doing at this moment is through importation, and that is not in our country. But I'll share this paper with you.
Yeah. Another question. Just what you have pointed out by utilizing the renewable energy mix. So, engineer Miss Neha Sakka, she has asked that I would like to know your views on electricity tariff and the charges on open access if one opt for renewable energy through open access. So, although it is not clear whether she has asked for in the context of EV only, or in a more generic, more elaborate perspective, but Mr. Bhattacharya would like to reply to this question.
So I'm just reading the question. I would like to know your views on the electricity tariff and the charges on open access. I'm not an electricity person, so I won't be able to comment much on it. But what I can comment is the fact that that if we are going for an open access, I think the tariffs have already been very competitive of late, because of the substantial reduction in the price through the reverse auction that we have seen in some of the states. But I think on the priority of auction, on the priority of the open access. So I think the possibly in terms of the emission associated with the electricity, that can be one of the considerations that should be taken into factor apart from the tariff when it comes to the open access sharing of the renewable energy that can be available for any consumer. So I think from that perspective, although I don't know whether I have been able to respond the question in a proper manner, but what I'm saying is that possibly one of the ways to actually increase the accessibility of many of the consumers would be to in fact build in the carbon embodiment in the electricity that is generated, rather than only looking at the price as a criteria.
Yeah, I think Ms. Sakka, Neha Sakka, as he has later on he has elaborated that in the context of EV, if one opts for renewable energy, they have to pay enormous charges for solar PV to the DISCOM. So I think she has received the answer from your reply, and we are moving to next question coming from Mr. Soumik Saha, that he wanted to ask something about the torque generation in EV.
Yeah, so it's still not clear. I want to ask something about the torque generation. Is it a question or?
I think I would request Mr. Saha to mail your question so that we can put it to our panel speakers separately, and you can receive your response in your mail. I would request you to kindly drop your email ID with your mail to IEI Headquarter Technical Department and put your question.
Yeah, so whatever I understand, see, in case of EVs, they don't have any fuel, so they don't produce torque through combustion. So so they generate the force necessary to turn the wheels with the help of the electric current. So yes. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, I think I would request Mr. Soumik Saha to kindly drop his question. If you want to have more elaborate answer, if you please drop your question to IEI Headquarter to Technical Department. And I would request Mr. Kingsuk Sen to kindly write the email ID for addressing the questions in the chat box so that our members of the audience can note it down and send their queries to IEI Technical, which can be passed on to our speaker and as well as other experts who are present in today's session. So now there is another question that has come from Mr. Bhagavati Perumal Pillai, that he has asked that I would like to know that with these challenges, how come EV marketing is booming in China?
Yeah, it's a good question. See, in China, I would say that they have sheer advantage on some of the materials which they are producing internally, particularly the rare earths. Because if you look at the rare earths, China has almost 95 to 97% of the total rare earths control. So that give a kind of a sheer advantage so far its domestic availability is concerned and competitiveness. Even if you look at the I think the price of a comparable electric vehicle in India and China and with the purchasing power parity, you will find it the electric vehicles in China to be relatively cheaper compared to what we see in India.
Oh yeah, thank you. And now another question from Mr. Rajasekaran AS, that sir, can you tell what is the research scope for mechanical engineers in EVs?
See, there are a lot of scope in terms of, don't look at it only from the product development perspective. I think we need to look at it from the entire value chain in terms of obviously how much amount of during the use phase, we are primarily looking at it from the manufacturing perspective, from the mechanical engineering perspective, in terms of how much a power is generated, how much that power is generated in the wheels, how fast it is able to achieve, but more, I think it's an interdisciplinary, I would say. So it is not a single stream that would be able to really contribute. And I would like to recall what my predecessor, Mr. Bhaskar Datta, was referring to. So this is the subject, and also Anirban mentioned it. So I think we need to overcome from the fact of working in silos or in specific streams to kind of bringing multiple disciplines to work together rather than focusing only on a stream specific contribution towards this transition. And that's how we can bring in a kind of relevant impact. And it's happening globally. Whatever little I have seen in other countries, that is where the beauty lies. So I think we have to come out from that traditional thinking to kind of explore how the interdisciplinary nature of various people coming with different streams can come and contribute towards the transition.
Definitely. And another question we are having from Mr. Shekhar Kumar De, that what about the effect in groundwater level in India due to EV?
Well, I would say as of now, because most of the mining is happening not in India, so definitely it's not going to affect much because whatever material that I mentioned, which are going into manufacturing the battery and the largely batteries, it is not being mined in the country. So from that perspective, the impact on the water level is not so high. But yes, if one fine day we find like kind of large deposits of many of these battery minerals, and if we start mining it in a manner which is being currently done, it will definitely have a water. But yes, as per the United Nations, we are actually a water scarce country. It's not like water abundance. So whatever we do, particularly if we have to support or promote end of life manufacturing or end of life management of electric vehicle components, then I think we have to go for more efficient processes which uses recycled water. Because most of these waters that are we have seen, in fact, it's a very intensive process. I don't know, I have my doubts to what extent they are actually recycling water, because recycling is also very expensive. So definitely they have to bring a closed loop zero ZLDs in the process to ensure that the water dependence is reduced, and that high graph vertical bar that we see for electric vehicle can be reduced significantly.
Yes. So now we are coming to the points of discussion, and few chat points are shared by Engineer Shantanu Sengupta, our co-chairman of Mechanical Engineering Division. And before I go to the listed out points shared by him, he has also commented that so unless there are alternate energy sources in place for at least 60 to 70% of the energy produced, introduction of EV, whether in vehicle or rail, doesn't help much in reducing overall pollution. The European Union energy mix shows the way. And also he has expressed that all mineral extraction pose environmental hazards, rare materials contribute more, and what possibilities are there in getting alternative battery technologies like aluminum based batteries and hydrogen fuel cell, etc. So we would like to share a few words on this.
Regarding the alternate energy sources, if I talk about renewable energy in the railway sector, they would be able to achieve it because of the vast assets that they have. That is not an issue, and they would be able to achieve it at a relatively cheaper manner. And because of the huge land assets, but the issue would be in terms of the the transport sector, because the transport sector is very diverse. The road transport sector, you have two-wheelers, you have three-wheelers, you have four-wheelers, you have light commercial vehicles, you have heavy-duty vehicles. Now, when we are talking about the electricity mix, while with be the effort to ensure that we are able to reduce the overall mix, but given that aspirations of individuals exist, so there is this debate on like when we are going to have that coal peak. Now, definitely the kind of targets that we have been set in terms of reducing our emission intensity and GHG emission intensity with regard to the GDP, it is very much in line with that one. But we also have to understand the fact that the diverse in the socio-economic conditions, and to meet their aspirations and the developmental goals, we need to bring in more electricity into the system, because the demand is growing fast, particularly in the residential sector. And if we have to meet that one, we have to deploy more electricity into the system. So it may happen in the short term, there would be more utilization, increasing the plant utilization factors to ensure that whatever PLFs with the current plants that are operating in, we need to increase that one in the short term, maybe retire some of the old plants having poor station heat rates, and then we simultaneously augment renewable energy. But that transition that we are talking about is not easy. It's going to be a time-consuming process. Until that is reached, we might see some coal peak happening maybe in the coming decade or so.
Of course, Mr. Bhattacharya. And right now, as Mr. Sengupta has pointed out a few challenges and as well as few way forwards, that particularly he has emphasis that on the battery technology, that one part is the cheaper battery technology and making the batteries sustainable, because the lithium mining, at present the lithium mining as far as Indian context is concerned, lithium mining is not present in a sizable manner in India, and it is lithium is getting imported from abroad. So these 2 points Mr. Sengupta has very correctly pointed out for making the battery cheaper, to move forward for and sustainable battery technology, because in the process of making it cheaper, the quality and safety cannot be compromised. And there comes the very important point as far as the Indian context is concerned, that is developing a quick charging and swapping facility and technical standards for that. So that part, quick charging and swapping facility for a long distance traveling four-wheeler vehicle, that is for a country like India, where the road transportation plays a very significant role. And if the EV intend to replace the petrol or diesel fueled four-wheelers in near future, these will be a great area. These will be of enormous challenging area, this charging and swapping facility, and that is also developing the proper technical standard. And vehicle design also need to be in place for accommodating this quick charging and swapping, what he has advised. And another very important point Mr. Sengupta has raised, that reducing the weight of vehicles, maybe of using aluminum alloy chassis and body. Souvik, would you like to elaborate on this point?
So there are 2-3 points which are emerging. One is the product design and the development part, which includes the batteries and the body. The second is the charging infrastructure. Now, regarding the body development, obviously using electric vehicles for long distances, particularly for trucks and buses, is a major challenge because of a 10-ton truck weight, curve weight, your 20 to 25 or 30% of the total would be attributable to the battery and the management system. So I don't know how this battery system for long distance buses would be applicable, but definitely city buses are seeing increase in utilization of these products. But in the long term, insofar like long distances buses are concerned, what would be required is that you might have to have charging infrastructure at frequent intervals. So there are models which are coming in, and in fact, some of the private Indian OEM manufacturers who are selling electric vehicles, they are coming up with very interesting solutions. So if somebody wants to take their electric vehicles for long distances, they have tie-ups with a lot of these roadside eateries and motels and so on and so forth. What happens is that if somebody wants to get their product or vehicle charged, you just go, you get it free of charge. So I think that kind of charging infrastructure at frequent intervals that we see largely for the traditional fuels is going to come up, at least in some of the key routes, maybe Delhi-Jaipur, Delhi, at least we have seen few in the Delhi-Jaipur route. It might come in the west, it might come in the south, which are like predominantly kind of tourist movement stretches. So the Principal Scientific Advisor's Office of the government, Principal Scientific the Prime Minister's Office, they have interestingly started a very good initiative on developing skill training programs for the kind of human resources that would be required for manning and running these stations. So, so I think there is a holistic thinking which is happening to augment the right people and the kind of right technologies at frequent places, so that people are not affected by the electric vehicles, but at the same time they are able to have access to the support that are needed for long distance travels. The challenge, however, also lies within the cities. It's not that only long distance challenges are there. There are challenges in the short distance as well. So I think it is going to take a kind of some time to really see how, to what extent and which segment has the largest acceptance of electric vehicles. If you really look at the global OEMs, they do not have a kind of an EV fleet in the country. It is only the Indian players who have their EV fleet, particularly in the four-wheel segment. And more importantly, it is yet to be seen that to what extent actually EVs are adopted in the four-wheel segment, because the sustainability in the three-wheel and the two-wheel segment is very clear. But in the four-wheel segment, there are still kind of yes and no's and assumptions and considerations that are being made to understand the extent of sustainability in the electric vehicles. Yes, there are initiatives so far swapping is concerned. Yes, there are initiatives in terms of battery standardization is concerned, but possibly that might be there for the commercial segment, may not be so much in the private segment.
Well, actually, this point also, we have got another question from Mr. Brahmesh Kumar Asta, that how about the safety of passengers in case of BEVs, at incidences of catching fire are being reported for two-wheeler BEVs while in use, and in some cases of exploding lithium-ion batteries as well. Exactly those things we have discussed, that they are the standard for sustainable battery as well as charging facility. Those are practically to some extent nascent stage in our country. And in your presentation, very key takeaway point was there, that electric vehicle, in US study, it has been revealed that electric vehicle can be sustainable after it runs 100,000 miles. So for a country like India, this question is from my side, that country like India, to make it sustainable, so what can be the benchmark of running kilometer? Because in line with this, Mr. Sengupta, he has recommended few policy related points as well, that more and more electric mass transport, like mass rapid transport, monorail, trolley bus, tram, those should be encouraged. And electric rail freight corridor should be more come in place. And the policy, a sound and friendly policy for conversion of IC vehicles for which are expiring to their registration period, converting those to EV, so that people get encouraged while not only investing on a new EV, but as well as to conversion of their ICE vehicles to EV. So there should be some policy, there should be some framework, regulatory framework from the government. And the incentives definitely for two and three wheelers, there are few incentives are in place, but maybe those are exactly not the case for the four wheelers. So these things, this for a country like India, that if for a private transportation system, private four-wheeler transportation system, what should be the benchmark for making or calling or saying that EV is viable, in terms of running of kilometers?
In the Indian context, you mean to say?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so in the Indian context, somewhere, so these are my crude estimates, somewhere in the range of, say, 1,20,000 kilometers at least, then we see a kind of a decent competing kind of a range that we can talk about, wherein it would be able to compete with the electric vehicle based on the, I must also make it a point that this is based on a number of factors on the range anxiety, and that too for the Delhi roads. Definitely these numbers would change if the city changes. Because if the city changes, a lot of other factors come into play, including your grid, including your vehicle range, including your performance, the frequency of charge and everything. So all these would be very much contingent to these driving practices and the product specification.
In that case, if 1,20,000 kilometer running of a hatchback or sedan vehicle in India, that makes a private EV viable. So people like us, who primarily because earlier we intended to compare between the initial cost of diesel driven car and petrol driven car, and unless and until for a city like India, for a city like Kolkata, in Delhi or Mumbai, the scenario would be different. For a city like Kolkata, unless and until sedan or hatchback car, private sedan or hatchback car runs for at least 50 kilometers in a day. So it was often found that investing on a diesel car was not lucrative option in terms of the life cycle costing. But
sorry, Anirban, to interject. The survey that we have done, you know how much the average driver driving in Delhi of electric vehicles compared to IC vehicles? It's 3 times. And on an average, electric vehicles cover almost 130 to 150 kilometers, vis-a-vis around 40 to 60 kilometers of IC vehicles. So people very much are aware. They know that the cost per kilometer is very low. Let me use it.
Right. That means there would be, so one silver lining is that electric vehicle would the economies of scale will be shifted definitely, and people, but that is having another impact, because in country like India, that highway surface, total surface area of the roads and highways, that infrastructure will also be get pressurized. Definitely, if people like us, common people enter into much more purchasing of much more EV or converting to EV, so that also would have an impact to be looked into.
No, absolutely. See, at the end of the day, it has a very the entire climate change mitigation strategies has a very interesting starting point. The starting point is that the traditional economic activities have certain impacts on the environment, right? be it air pollution, water pollution, land degradation, and so on and so forth. Now, if we have to move or change the practice and the habits or the behavior, then there has to be some upfront costs. The more we delay the process, that upfront costs are going to increase. So it is a trade-off between whether we want to do it now or we want to do it 20 years hence. The more we delay, the upfront cost for anything is going to be an uphill task. Now, one can debate that, yes, by that time technologies will mature. But if you don't initiate now, only then we will talk about maturization of technologies and scales and benefits so far the costs are concerned. But if we don't take it now, then the process is kind of pushing it towards the future. So that's where in summary we have to actually begin, and there is an externality internalization that is happening for anything. Now, how do we do it? Obviously subsidy. And how we utilize that subsidy? Obviously in a most efficient manner. And that's the reason why we have seen the government introducing the production link incentives announced during the COVID, and they have also like expanded to various type of sectors globally in India. If you look at the solar in 2010 to 2014, the kind of support the solar sector has witnessed, and that was like a time where there has been a significant growth in the manufacturing capacity and the expansion. And because of that investment that was made, the outcome that we see in terms of its deployment happening 6, 8, or 10 years hence. So I think that lead time has to be provided depending on the complexity of technology and sectoral challenges that need to be kind of overcome.
Absolutely. We all fully agree with you. So there is one last question we would like to take up from Mr. Ranjan Kumar, that he has asked that as developing countries like India, large volume of batteries consumption and accordingly disposal or scrapping the same could be biggest challenge. Could you please guide or provide some forthcoming planning or innovation?
So what we are doing, this is a good question. We have very recently drafted a guideline for the do's and the don'ts for typical battery disposal and scrapping. We are actually trying to pilot that one in maybe few states to see what is the response from the government. And if we are able to find that one being accepted smoothly with maybe certain modifications, then what we will try to do is let that be a kind of a guideline identified for all the future technological developers or even like scrap recyclers who needs to follow these guidelines as a part of their processes. Maybe a kind of a acceptance to that one would consider a mandation or requirement for them to be registered as a registered recycler of electric vehicle batteries.
Yeah, definitely. So actually we have come to the fag end of this today's session, and definitely it has been an excellent session, I must admit. Unfortunately, today our Dr. G. Ranganath, Chairman of Committee of Advancement and Technology and Engineering of IEI, he could not join due to some preoccupation. And also our respected President, Dr. Hemant Tankar Rao Thackeray, he also could not join due to some other commitment. And just now I received that our Honorary Secretary of West Bengal State Center, Professor Dr. Raju Bosak, he is also just now he has been suddenly occupied in another meeting. So he has requested me to do the honor for placing the vote of thanks. So first of all, on behalf of Dr. Raju Bosak, I extend my sincere thanks and gratitude to all the distinguished participants and the panelists who has attended for the last 2 years in this technical webinar on the theme of sustainability opportunities and challenges for electric vehicle towards energy transition in India, organized by Mechanical Engineering Division of the West Bengal State Center of IEI through online platform Zoom. And at the outset, first of all, I would like to convey my sincere thanks to today's theme speaker, Mr. Souvik Bhattacharya, who is the Associate Director, Integrated Policy Analysis Division, the Energy Resources Institute, known as TERI. And I would also like to convey my sincerest thanks to my colleague in West Bengal State Center Committee and convener, Mechanical Engineering Division, Mr. Bhaskar Datta, for his introduction of the theme and introducing the speaker in front of the audience. And also, he is the man behind driving this series of lecture on climate change. My sincere thanks also goes to Dr. Nirmal Das, Chairman, West Bengal State Center IEI, Dr. H.O. Thakre, President IEI, Engineer Sandeep Kumar Dev, Vice President IEI, Dr. N.T. Rangareddy, Chairman, Mechanical Engineering Division Board IEI, who has always been an a man of encouragement and support to any activity undertaken by the Mechanical Engineering Division. Dr. G. Ranganath, who is the Chairman of Committee for Advancement of Technology and Engineering of IEI. And we have missed Professor Dr. Raju Bosak, Honorary Secretary of the West Bengal State Center IEI in today's session, who is also the Associate Professor of Techno India University. We miss today you, sir. And I would like to express and extend my sincerest thanks to all members of the IEI All India Council who have been present today, all the members of Mechanical Engineering Division Board, all members of the State Committee of the West Bengal State Center, and members of the Mechanical Engineering Divisional Subcommittee, Director Technical of IEI at IEI Headquarters and his team, particularly Mr. Kingsuk Sen, for extending their wholehearted support to make the program a grand success. And of course, last but not the least, I would like to thank all the persons, all the staffs and officials of West Bengal State Center who have extended their support behind the scene and made the webinar a fruitful one. And I believe that we will be capturing the key takeaway points from this webinar as well as the earlier ones which we organized in this series. And definitely it will be captured in a volume of document. So with the permission of chair, I would request Mr. Kingsuk Sen of IEI Headquarters to kindly discontinue the live webcast and ending today's session. Thank you all.